So I'll speak to you today about the microbiome. I've been studying the microbiome for the past 20 years. I am a professor at DTU, at the Center for Biosustainability, but also an entrepreneur within the microbiome space, within life science in general, and sort of split my time between those two activities. But today I want to try and take you through, in the sort of end of the day for you, a little bit about microbiome 101, you could say. So really try to explain what is a bacterium, consider the fact whether we are actually human, and then sort of think a little bit about what is the life of a bacterium inside the body, how does it affect your health, and are there things that you can do about it? And then if we have time, also think about whether there are some things that we can learn from the bacteria in our body. So if we start out, if we think about bacteria, this is an image of a bacterium. So they're typically tiny. They're about 1 to 2 micrometers long. They can be rod-shaped or they can be sort of spherical. And for a long time, when we looked at all the biodiversity on the planet, we didn't really consider bacteria very interesting, because everything we could see, all the animals, all the trees, the fungi, etc., we saw a lot of diversity, but every time we picked up a microscope and looked at the microbes, we didn't really see much. We just saw, rod-shaped or spherical-shaped things. So sort of the general consideration about biodiversity was that we had a lot of macrobiodiversity and very little diversity when it came to bacteria. Then, over the past 25 years, we have increased our ability to read biology and to understand the molecular details of biology through DNA sequencing, to a point where the cost of sequencing a human genome back in 2000s was over $100 million, and now it's approaching $100 to have your genome sequenced. So there's been a radical expansion in our ability to read biology. And with that came a growing appreciation that our sort of initial understanding about biological diversity was wrong. And in fact, the microorganisms are where all the diversity is. So once you look at the molecular details of biology, you will actually find that all of the animals and all of the trees and all of the macro things that we can see and that we consider very diverse, they actually make up a very small part of the tree of life. And all the actual diversity that we have on the planet is microbial. So microbes have existed on the planet for over 3 billion years, and they have evolved in all directions. And so basically anywhere you look, you'll find microbes, whether it's in hot springs, whether it's inside the guts of leafcutter ants, whether it's in the soil, or whether it's at the deep ocean at the hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean. They're all colonized with bacteria. And that's really, the diversity that we have around us. Of course, you're here, you care about maybe not biodiversity in general, but human health. So it's also important to appreciate that the bacteria live everywhere on you. For instance, on your skin, you have lots of bacteria on your skin. Even when you wash your hands, you still have bacteria, and you want those bacteria to stay there. They're also in your gut, sort of the inside of the donut, so to speak. And you have probably heard a lot, and I'll give you a few examples of how they do affect you. So if you think about yourself and you think about whether you're just human, then you have to sort of also maybe consider the bacteria that live on your body. Because really it is much more diverse than all the animals that you can find in a zoo. So I'll give you a few stats around sort of this bacterial human competition. So if you think in terms of mass, you're about 70 times more human than you are bacterial. So if you just weigh the bacteria in your body, they are only 1 out of 70 sort of average weight. However, if you think about the number of cells, then you're actually 1-to-1, human cells and bacterial cells. So the bacterial cells are smaller than the human cells, but in number, they're approximately equal to the number of human cells. So from that perspective, you're sort of half-half human and bacterial. If you then think about the number of genes that are encoded, then the thing actually turns around, and there are 100 times more genes in your body that are encoded by bacteria compared to what you encode in your human genome. So in fact, when you think about the metabolic capabilities, all the biological capabilities, then the bacteria in your body actually have 100 times more, you could say, ammunition to fire with in terms of affecting your body. So I would say the question is open whether we're more human or bacterial. It depends on your perspective. But certainly when you think about yourself as a human, you should really also consider the bacteria that are inside your body. So if you're a bacterium and you live on a human body, then you might wonder, what is life like as a bacterium inside the body? And a bacterium that lives in the microbiota somewhere, it could be in the gut, it could be on the skin, is really focused on three different things. It's focused on growth, it's focused on exchange, and it's focused on warfare. And a bacterium is remarkable in terms of its ability to grow if you give it the right food. So bacteria, they divide themselves and they continue to divide. And within 10 hours, if you have enough food, one bacteria will have become 1 billion bacteria, and so forth. So they're really able to grow very quickly. In the body, it doesn't happen because there's not that much food. But it's still remarkable and highlights the potential of bacteria. One other thing that is important to consider when you think about the bacteria is that they can actually talk together. So even though they are very simple creatures, they have developed forms of communication with you and with themselves. So they send signals. And if you take a blood sample, you'll find thousands of molecules in your blood sample that are exclusively produced by the bacteria in the body. They're signaling and they're talking to you, and they're trying to live their life in the best possible way inside all of us. They do also exchange a lot, these bacteria. And you typically have a very complicated ecosystem, and that's what makes some of this microbiome research really complex, is that the bacteria depend upon each other. So you can't really study the bacteria in isolation. You have to kind of study them in a community because they're exchanging food with each other. And most of the bacteria in our guts, for instance, cannot really grow readily on their own in the laboratory. So researchers have to study them sort of as communities because of these exchanges. And they can also exchange DNA. So some of you who've had an antibiotic-resistant infection, you may have had the unfortunate experience that the antibiotic doesn't work. And that's because bacteria are really good at exchanging DNA. And that can happen in your gut. So I did my PhD on investigating how pathogenic bacteria became drug-resistant from grabbing antimicrobial resistance genes from commensal normal bacteria that lived in our guts. So there's a lot happening in the gut, and it is a pretty fierce environment also. There's a lot of warfare because there's not really enough food for all of the bacteria. So they keep this arms race where they're trying to either they collaborate or they fight. They have allies, they have foes. And one example is, for instance, a bacterium called Staph aureus, which causes a lot of skin infections, actually also a lot of bloodstream infections. It can colonize your nose. And there's another bacterium, Staphylococcus epidermis, which will produce a factor that basically kills off Staph aureus. So if you're lucky and you have Staph epidermis in your nose, you'll have a low amount of Staph aureus, which will mean you have a lot lower risk of getting certain infections, for instance, which can come from Staph aureus. So this warfare can also be a good thing. All right, so this sort of complex community of many different bacteria that live in our guts, how does it actually affect our health? And it will be impossible for me to go through all of the examples of how the microbiome can affect your health. but I'll just give a few examples that sort of highlight the breadth of impact that the microbiome can have. So one important and interesting example is related to obesity. So you're able to create genetically modified mice that become obese, and you can see one of them there next to a sort of lean mouse. So this is not AI generated. This is how they look, the obese mice. And interestingly, if you then take the feces from the obese mice and the feces from the lean mice, and you give that to a mouse that doesn't have any bacteria at all, then the one that received the feces from the obese mice will become obese. And the one that received the feces from the lean mice will become lean. And researchers have looked into this a long time ago and identified this, and they found out that what really drove this difference is that, as you might imagine, some of the food we can digest, that we take in, we can digest ourselves, but a lot of it doesn't really get digested. And so some aspect of obesity is really linked to the ability of the gut microbiomes to harvest more or less energy from the food we eat. And so that's just one example of how the microbiome can affect you. Another example, which is surprising to many, and I think I had thought maybe the slides would be bigger, so it's going to be hard to see here. But another study was done in terms of autism and the development of autism. So researchers took fecal samples from people who had autism and people who were sort of typical development people. And they then transplanted the feces into these sterile mice, and then they investigated what did these mice do that received the feces from autistic individuals or typically developed individuals. And what they actually found was that there was a clear change in the sort of signals of autism that a mouse does. And this is related, for instance, to mice that received fecal samples from autistic individuals. They spent more time burying these little glass beads, these marbles, than the mice who received fecal samples from typically developed individuals. However, they were much less in direct contact with each other, so they kind of tried to not be in direct contact with other mice. And also, they were less adventurous when they were walking around in open spaces. They would walk less around. So the microbiota actually conferred some of these symptoms, which we tend to think about as more psychological symptoms, again highlighting that the gut microbiome can impact our behavior quite a bit. Another example is related to cancer. And so if you're so unlucky to get cancer, you might be treated with immune therapy. And there was a research group recently that looked into patients that fared well on immunotherapy and patients who fared less well on immunotherapy. And what they found was that there were certain compounds that were microbially produced that are called indole acetic acid, that if people on immune therapy had a high concentration of indole acetic acid in their blood, they would respond much more favorable and have a substantial boost in their survival, overall survival, when on immune checkpoint inhibitors versus those that had a low abundance. And they actually were able to identify also specific microbes in the microbiome that produced this compound that were associated with, you could say, the response to cancer therapy. So again, this highlights sort of this crosstalk that there is between the microbiota and the host, in particular in terms of modulating the immune system. So a lot of reasons to care about the microbiota. So one question is, what can we do about all of this? So can we actually change our microbiota? And we can. There are ways to do that. So So I mean, anything from, and people have studied a lot of this, so anything from eating fermented food products, this could be yogurt, this could be kimchi, it could be sauerkraut, or various products, they actually have beneficial health effects that are mediated by the microbiota. Things like eating a plant-based diet is associated with increasing the diversity of the microbiota, which also improves, in most cases, leads to more beneficial health impacts. And then you can, of course, take probiotic supplements, or some of the things that we're working on now in my lab, where we're actually amending the functionality of probiotic supplements using genetic engineering. So we're sort of supercharging probiotic supplements. And I'll give you a few examples of this. First, one interesting strain, Lactobacillus rhamnosus strain, which has been shown to actually alleviate symptoms of anxiety. Both in this case, typically in animals, you measure anxiety in this, which is called a plus cage, where you basically see how much time does the mouse spend on this elevated surface where it sort of can slip down. It's not very comfortable for a mouse to be there. But if they amend the microbiota of this mouse with this particular bacterium, it will venture out much more and basically exhibit a behavior that is associated with lower anxiety. And some of these strains are also being validated in human trials, where you can see that probiotic supplements can reduce anxiety and stress in clinical trials. So that's one thing. Another sort of emerging probiotic that is coming is based on some work that also we did in my lab together with Olof Borby Pedersen. We basically said, well, we know that these bacteria are communicating with our body. Maybe they produce hormones that affect our body. And so we were able to find a particular hormone, which there is a gut bacterium that produces, called RORDIP. And it looked similar to some of the human hormones. And we could see that when we looked in humans and we looked at blood samples and we sampled for the presence of this hormone, people who had a higher proportion of this hormone, bacterial hormone, they were much more lean compared to those that had a lower abundance of this hormone. So we speculated that it impacted the metabolism. And we were able to show in a set of experiments in animals where we could see that when we actually administered the bacterial strain that produced this hormone, we had a significant reduction both in body weight, but also in body fat. So these are some of these potentials that we can have from these probiotic strains. We also engineered a microorganism to specifically produce this hormone in high amounts so that it's sort of a supercharged probiotic. And we could see that then when you take this probiotic and you do a challenge, a glucose challenge, you look at insulin sensitivity, you can see that animals that receive the supercharged probiotic respond better and they have improved glucose control. You can also take this further, and we've done that. So we've engineered probiotic yeast that produce GLP-1 receptor agonists directly in your gut. So you have a probiotic that will directly produce a human hormone, and this also leads to impact on host metabolism, reductions in body weight, and those effects that you expect from GLP-1 receptor agonists. Finally, one of the other supercharged probiotics that we have worked with is in the area of cancer treatment, inspired by some of the work that I mentioned before, where there are certain microbiome metabolites that are important in promoting sort of a heightened immunity against cancers. We engineered a bacterium that would produce this molecule in very high amounts that can be injected. Maybe you don't want to do this, but can be injected into the bloodstream, and then it will actually move into the tumors that you have in your body, and it will stay in the tumors and produce this compound. And when it produces this compound, it actually reduces tumor growth on its own. So this is also a way that you can sort of use the microbiome and bacteria to improve health. So I think I'm out of time, but just wanted to say also that I've been working with bacteria for a long time. Also thought about, can we learn anything from bacteria? And I will not have time to go into it, but I wrote a book about it around how bacteria can actually, and how the life of bacteria can help us live our lives better, and how we can be better at setting up meaningful goals for ourselves and achieving them. So, if you're interested, happy to talk about this further. But basically, I think that that's it for me now. I hope you have had a little bit of answer to some of your questions around the microbiome. And thank you for your attention and staying to the end.
Thank you so much.